Welcome back. So there are growing concerns about the future of South Africa's economy. This is the country gears up for a national coalition government. Now, analysts previously warned that uncertain outcomes could affect economic policy going forward. It comes as the country battles low growth, high unemployment, debt, and a cost of living crisis due to elevated inflation. But for more on this, let's bring in Ann Bernstein, Executive Director for the Center for Development and Enterprise, on the business perspective and expectations on upcoming coalitions after the 2024 elections. Ann, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, there's so much to look at, and what I'd like to do in this conversation is really to look at the various policies of some of the top performing parties going into the National Assembly and what those policies would mean for job creation, certainly, and boosting the economy. But you wrote a piece for the Business Day in April, wherein, and I want to read this out, you say, when you say to people in and around the ANC about jobs, they will say they acknowledge the existence of an employment crisis but deny its connection to governance and policy failures. You wrote that in April in the run-up to these elections, and I think it's an important point to make. How much governance plays a role in our economic performance?
I think it plays an enormous role. So South Africa is in a very, very precarious position at the moment. We've had, in many respects, bad policy, terrible government performance, and the lack of leadership for certainly the last 6 years, and before that, an even worse situation under President Zuma. So we're paying for that with a terribly high unemployment rate. And when the government talks about job opportunities, or the previous government talks about job opportunities in the ANC manifesto, these aren't jobs like you and I might have, where we're employed, and the odds are, if reasonably good, we'll stay employed for as long as we perform. These are short-term, temporary job opportunities that the ANC manifesto was promising. And this is not what South Africa needs. So I think we're at a very precarious situation. We can either see this as a moment where the possibility of building the center of South African politics, committed to the Constitution, committed to economic reform, some more than others, but in the right direction, more or less. That's what's offered. If we can get some kind of working arrangement among the ANC and parties that believe in democratic principles and the rule of law and peaceful political action.
Yeah, you know...
or we get a very different kind of situation which will be disastrous for South Africa.
Yeah, and part of the issue, I suppose, Anne, is really comparing the... I suppose, job creation and policy proposals that each party puts forward, so that if they do work together, you see the sort of direction that we go in terms of boosting the economy. And you touch on the ANC's policy, and I want to start with that just to do a little bit of a deep dive there. Their manifesto has promised support for small businesses, the job creation, creating 2.5 million jobs through the presidential employment stimulus, industrialization. Where are the faults here? Let's start there.
Look, the words sound fine, except for job opportunities, as I've pointed out. I'm in favor of growing the economy and creating economic jobs, not public sector funded jobs. Now, I'm not opposed to helping people while we do that. But what South Africa needs is to create an environment, not just words, but to take the actions required to create an environment in which firms can expand and new firms can grow. And we're not doing that. And that then in turn creates jobs. So I think you've got to look beyond the words. We've written a lot about the government's approach to industrial policy, to localization, which we think makes us a less productive, less competitive economy, therefore less jobs and growth. We're starting maybe, to see the first steps of the previous government in reforming Transnet state-owned monopolies, which have been very efficient, very bad for both consumers like you and me and poorer people, but also very bad for companies. So we're starting to see some changes there. I don't think they go far enough. I don't think they open up to competition and markets as much as they should. And then we have a terrible crime situation. The NPA has basically failed South Africa in terms of dealing with an elite that has been looting the state. And so crime is a very big factor.
Yeah.
So all of these create a very bad environment for growth and then in turn for jobs for people.
Let me ask you this, Anne. So we're looking at the various configurations that we could see where coalition talks are concerned. Let's say we look at an option where the ANC perhaps decides to work with Umkhonto weSizwe, and we're focusing specifically now on their ideas on how they would take the country forward. The Umkhonto weSizwe manifesto is saying they would see constitutional reform, redefining boundaries, reducing provinces to 4, replacing the constitution, traditional government sphere and local government. They say expropriate land without compensation. They say promote labor rights, establish a sovereign wealth fund and reduce reliance on foreign investment. And then saying nationalize the Reserve Bank, reconstitute, establish state-owned banks, separate prudential authority from the Reserve Bank and nationalize large banks and insurance companies. What would that look like?
I think if the ANC forms a coalition government with MK, the economy is in desperate trouble. We will have a much higher unemployment rate. We will see enormous, increased skilled immigration out of the country, and we will not get investment. This will be a very dangerous scenario for South Africa. And, well, I think that's a very different conversation. So I don't know, and I think nobody knows enough about the precise nature of MK, but they are not constitutional Democrats. And I think this will be a disastrous scenario for business, for the country, for all of us who live in it.
And I'm looking at the various permutations here. If the ANC were to say, all right, let's get into bed then with the economic freedom fighters and pull some of those numbers together, the EFF's policy is establishing state-owned companies for job creation, state-owned companies for housing, roads, security, cleaning, horticulture, landscaping, and in-source security personnel. They've talked about economic zones with job creation incentives, a mandate minimum of 80% domestic procurement by state, of course, policy reforms promoting at least 50% unionization of businesses. What would that look like for economic growth?
I think it'll be equally disastrous. The EFF, we've seen for a long time, is an inherently fascist organization. They're often violent, and they don't believe in constitutional democratic principles. So I think this will be equally disastrous for the country, for our economy, and will stop the kind of economic reforms that have haltingly been started by President Ramaphosa or former President Ramaphosa. I think it'll be terrible for South Africa. All bets are off if they do a deal with them. We've seen in Ekurhuleni and in Johannesburg terrible outcomes from an ANC-EFF deal. So I don't think we should be under any illusion that if the ANC goes in that direction to build a coalition to govern with the EFF or the MK, the economy is in desperate trouble, but South Africa is in desperate trouble as well. It'll be unstable, and it'll be send entirely the wrong message to investors in South Africa and overseas.
All right. And then we look at the proposals that are put forward by the Democratic Alliance, and if partnered with the African National Congress, what that would look like. They're saying labor market reform. So they're asking for an overhaul of the Labor Relations Act, remove BEE, remove race targets in employment and procurement laws. They're saying no new tax commitments, have inflation-adjusted brackets, stabilize public debt through fiscal rules, the red tape reduction, establishment of one-stop shops for small businesses, and then, of course, the open electricity market, which they've talked about quite a lot, right? Improve power supply reliability by unbundling and restructuring Eskom. Now, tell me what you think that would do, but also I think my biggest standout here is the remove BEE, remove race targets. What do we do about the transformation question in the new dispensation of our country?
Well, let me put it this way. I think the best option for South Africa in the post this election is for some kind of governing relationship between the ANC, the IFP and the DA, and one or two very small parties. These are people who committed to the Constitution and who want to move along the direction of economic reform in different ways. So I think that is the only positive scenario we can see for the country. Now, there's some big compromises that are going to have to be made and serious discussions about policy. And in fact, tomorrow, my organization is launching the work that we've been doing over the last 6 months on priorities for the next government. If we want to get the country out of the crisis that we're in, if we want to deal seriously with probably the world's worst unemployment situation, then we have to make sure that the negotiations that are taking place, hopefully between those parties, are not just about politics and power and position, but are also about priorities for action. And I think that's going to be a very important component of whatever kind of positive governing arrangement can be found between those parties that can start to move South Africa in the right direction.
Yeah, and one last question, and we can make this one a quick, short one. Of course, in these negotiations, there's a sense that for some parties, daggers may be out for the president, right? What do we do with that particular position for the sake of our economy, in your view?
I don't think there's going to be a working arrangement of parties committed to the Constitution and the kind of economic reform the IFP, the DA, and the ANC talk about without Cyril Ramaphosa playing a very big role. So I don't want to prejudge any of this, but I think that's what's going to, that would be the best scenario for the country. And there's some big issues they're all going to have to talk about. First and foremost, who they're going to support for Speaker and who they support for President. And if the IFP and the ANC support Cyril Ramaphosa for President, what are they going to get in return? So we're into an era of negotiation. And I am arguing that part of that negotiation is not just about who gets what position, but about how we get the kinds of much deeper reforms that the country needs in order to get our economy growing. That needs to be part of the negotiations that are going on as we speak.
Yeah. Well, Ann, thank you so much for speaking to us. We really, really do appreciate it. Ann Bernstein, of course, is the Executive Director for the Center for Development and Enterprise.